Hello and welcome. My name is Lynda Cherry. I'm the author of the book Judah and Joseph Reunited, The Hope for Israel. And I'm joined here with my friend Jason Olson, the author of the book The Burning Book. Welcome, Jason. Tell us a little bit about yourself, your background, your heritage, and why you wrote the book you did.
Thank you, Linda. I'm so happy to be with you and to be able to present this. I think we should just state outright that we are just speaking for ourselves, and we both have a deep love for the Jewish people and the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints and its members. But we are not speaking on behalf of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints and or nor for the United States of Israel or for the state of Israel or any other. We're just speaking for ourselves and speaking what we believe and know to be true. Um, yeah, I um, so yes, along with my co-author James Goldberg, um, who has a more Jewish sounding name due to his heritage than I do. We co-wrote The Burning Book, a Jewish Mormon memoir, which is about my story, and I won't get into my entire story. I definitely refer people to The Burning Book. Um, but I wanted to come on and have this conversation with you because part of what drew me to the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints and the Book of Mormon and the prophet Joseph Smith was very positive teachings about the Jewish people and the land of Israel that I had not really encountered in other churches. The Book of Mormon is absolutely clear of God's continuing covenant with the Jewish people, that, I, the Lord, have not forgotten my people, and a commandment to all members of the church and all who embrace the Book of Mormon to recover the Jewish people. And that's not in the sense of proselytizing or conversion, but in the sense of taking responsibility as a shepherd for sheep, that members of the church and its leaders should recover the Jewish people in the sense of caring for them and taking responsibility for their future, and for their well-being. And so Israel is in a war for its survival right now. That may not be what the media is trying to portray in some pockets, but it is. It only has 7 million Jews, and it's facing hundreds of millions of potentially of people, of terrorists who would like to exterminate the Jewish people in 2023. Um, and as we're going to get into, I was also drawn to the prophet Joseph Smith and his very deep love for the Jewish people, seeing himself as responsible for them. In fact, he received priesthood keys from Moses in the Kirtland Temple in April 1836, keys for the gathering of Israel. And Joseph Smith saw himself as responsible for the gathering of the Jewish people to the land of Israel, to have, in Orson Hyde's word, um, a distinct nation and government. Uh, and so Joseph Smith was committed to the Jewish people's well-being, his entire ministry, and he never swerved from that. He was also very committed to the integrity of Judaism itself and believed and taught that Judaism was the covenant of Abraham and that the Jewish people had never deviated from the traditions of Abraham. So that drew me to a kinship with the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints and its members, and I began to perceive them as from Joseph. And so when I came into contact with you, and knowing that you were working on a book and research, and much of your other work was so positive about the Jewish people, but helping your calling to help Latter-day Saints recover their identity as Joseph, even though, yes, we have it in patriarchal blessings. But what does that really mean? And I was just so grateful that you were working on that and that you had this desire to reunite Joseph and Judah. Um, and I think that's what we're trying to do here.
Yes, thank you, Jason. And just to clarify, because I'm not sure it was clear, you are from the lineage of Judah. You were born a Jew, you were raised in the Jewish faith, and consider yourself to still be a Jew, a Jewish Latter-day Saint. Is that correct?
Yes, I think some would disagree with how I define myself, but this is America, and we can self-define. And but yes, I was raised in Reform Judaism. But as a teenager, I began to become more attracted to Orthodox Judaism, and I'd always been a very religious um, person and a religious child. And so and I was very committed to the covenant of Sinai, the covenant of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob that I found in Judaism. I never had intended to distance myself from it, but I came into a miraculous encounter with the Book of Mormon that a friend had given me, Dave Thaxton and Shay Owens. They had given me a copy of the Book of Mormon. Um, I won't get into the entire story, but was very reluctant to take it, and had decided one night as a 14-year-old boy to burn the Book of Mormon. And I went into my backyard with a lighter, and as I pulled out the Book of Mormon with my left hand and the lighter in my right hand, I was about to flick the switch of the lighter and burn the Book of Mormon and just sweep up its ashes. At the moment I was about to do so, I felt a voice that said, "Do not burn my book." And I began to feel that the Book of Mormon that I was holding could very well be sacred scripture, and that I would very seriously offend God if I were to burn it. So I began to read it, and I discovered that the Book of Mormon was written to all the remnants of the house of Israel, including Judah, and with a message of the covenant, the unbreakable covenant between God and the house of Israel, including the Jewish people as a branch, but also a message about Jesus Christ being uh, a case for him being the Messiah. I was uh, I was very persuaded, especially by Third Nephi, when the actual coming of Jesus. Some folks have been pushing against me for not taking a pacifist approach, but Jesus is coming in Third Nephi is a type and shadow of what Latter-day Saints believe to be the second coming. He does actually destroy the wicked. There we have a record of all the Nephite cities that and Lamanite cities that get destroyed by fire or earthquake, or the earth caving in, like in the story of Korach, and Jesus coming to establish his kingdom. It only lasts for 2 centuries, so it's not the full millennium that everybody is waiting for that believes in the Messiah, but we do see messianic power in the Book of Mormon, and what it looks like when Jesus establishes Zion, and the peace, the tranquility, the righteousness, the prosperity, in the sense that that everybody has what they need. So Jesus was able to set up that kind of community. But along with the Jewish people, we're still waiting for the Messiah to come, or for the Messiah to come again, uh, in the case of Latter-day Saints, but we're awaiting that permanent kingdom. So, but there's some great things that have happened in the latter days that we're going to talk about, that have set both Judah and Joseph up for redemption.
Yes. Thank you so much for sharing that, Jason. We actually have a fair amount in common in that both of us from our childhood really yearned after the things of God, loved the scriptures, and wanted to understand what covenant meant. I started studying the Bible when I was 9 years old. And the first story that hit my heart fully and deeply was the story of Moses at Mount Sinai, where God spoke to Moses like a man speaks to his friend face to face. And that started me on my particular journey. In the meantime, as I continued my reading, the next thing that really hit my heart was the story of King David. I loved how King David loved God so much that he couldn't restrain himself from dancing before the ark. And David loved God so much that he took the personal responsibility of uniting Israel. In fact, all of Israel ended up coming to David and asking him to be their king. David, of course, was from Judah, and he became a type and a shadow of the forthcoming Messiah who would come through David's lineage. In other words, he would be from the house of Judah, he'd be from the house of David, and God made this promise to David based on David's pure heart of love towards God and David's desire to help his people to understand what it meant to be a covenant people, with the temple at the center of their lives and the center of their religion. And so I think it was because of King David that I developed this incredible love for the Jewish people, to the point where I say people ask me all the time, in fact, if I am Jewish, because I do write so much about the ancient practices and I do have such a deep love for the Jews. Unfortunately, so far DNA has not concluded I'm Jewish, but I've had this long-standing desire to show love and to bring some sort of healing, if I can, to all that's been perpetrated against the Jewish people for millennia. And so I've become quite a historian in terms of the Jewish people and their history. And about a year and a half ago, which is interesting on timing, I started dreaming paragraphs in my mind where I saw paragraphs written out that became this book, Judah and Joseph Reunited, The Hope for Israel. To be honest with you, it's not something I'd thought about before. It was literally just, I was seeing it in dreams. And obviously, when you have an experience like that, it becomes something really deeply personal to you. And the understanding that came to me about how important it is to recognize both Judah and Joseph as being the leading tribes of Israel, meaning they both received patriarchal blessings of leadership from their father Jacob, who was named Israel after he made a covenant with God, that both Judah and Joseph would have leadership blessings. Judah specifically had the right of divine kingship, and that through that kingly line, starting with David, King David, through that kingly line would come the Messiah, the son of David, who is Jesus Christ, our Messiah. But also, Judah took on the responsibility of keeping all of these covenants sacred, of writing them out. The Bible, as the Book of Mormon tells us, that how important the Bible is. For the prophet Ezekiel has a vision that he sees Israel has died, and he sees it basically through the scattering first of the 10 tribes of Israel, who were led by Joseph or his son Ephraim, led into apostasy, taken away captive, and then Judah taken away captive by the Babylonians. Ezekiel lives during that Babylonian captivity, and he has a vision of a valley of dead bones, dead, dry bones. And in that vision, God says, do you think I can bring these bones back to life? Do you think that Israel can come to life again? And that is then when God shows to Ezekiel 2 sticks, or what might be called 2 wooden tablets, or we refer to 2 books. And the one book being the book of Joseph, and the other book being the book of Judah. Now, we believe that book of Judah is obviously the Bible, and the book of Joseph is the Book of Mormon. So for me, as a 17-year-old, when I first started taking missionary lessons with the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, everything fell into place, as I had loved these ancient prophecies from Ezekiel, Isaiah, and others, and that then I'm reading in the Book of Mormon the same kind of prophecy
Yeah.
given to the prophet Nephi, that these two books have to come together, but not just the two books, the two people,
Yeah.
Joseph and Judah. And their role as Joseph and Judah is to gather all of Israel together.
Yes.
So as time went on, in my 17-year-old learning, I came across so much about Joseph Smith and how much Joseph Smith loved the Jews, like from the very beginning of his ministry. And I couldn't help but wonder if his love for the Jews also came similarly as with mine, because his family was always gathered around reading the Bible at night. And
Yeah.
I couldn't help but wonder if part of it came from that. But then also that very first night that Moroni appeared to Joseph, the particular scriptures that Moroni recited to Joseph had everything to do with, number one, turning the hearts of the children to the promises made to the fathers. In other words,
Yes.
ancient covenant promises.
Hmm.
And then also about the binding together and gathering together of Israel again. So then I think, well, it's no wonder with this combined experience that the Jews were so much on Joseph's heart. They were the only remaining tribe of Israel that had retained their identity and had also not assimilated amongst the other world religions and the other world. And of course, there's exceptions, but as a whole, the Jewish people have retained their identity.
Yeah.
So from the very beginning, Joseph Smith is writing in the Times and Seasons as the editor and inviting Jewish rabbis to write articles that he in no way edited or made any changes to, and instead instructed his readers how wise they would be to take learning from these Jewish teachers.
Yes. No, thank you, Lynda. That's that was so clear. Thank you. Um, yeah, did you want to talk a bit more about the times and seasons? What are you thinking?
Well, that Joseph Smith really stood out amongst his contemporaries. If we looked at that period of time in history, it was a truly anti-Semitic period of time.
Yeah.
Also anti-Catholic as well. But for Joseph Smith to specifically teach against anti-Semitism and to promote specifically the gathering of the Jews and the gathering of the Jews back to their homeland of Israel with Jerusalem as its capital was truly groundbreaking during that period of time.
Yeah, I can just share a personal story here. A couple months ago, I had the distinct honor to attend the Spanish and Portuguese synagogue of New York City, of Manhattan, on the what would it be? The Upper West Side of Manhattan, of Central Park. This synagogue was founded by Rabbi Gershom Sages, who was one of the first, rabbis in the United States of America. Well, it wasn't even the United States yet. This was in the 17th century, in the land of America, should we say. Rabbi Gershom Sages has a son named Joshua Sages, and Joshua Sages uh, is the teacher of Hebrew to the prophet Joseph Smith.
Oh,
Um, And I had the privilege of going to this synagogue for an entire Shabbat, um, and learning about the history from the leaders of the synagogue, and I mean uh, in all divine providence, the head rabbi of that synagogue, Rabbi Meir Soloveitchik, who is an incredible rabbi. He is one of the lights of the rabbinate in the United States today, the great lights, and he's given many speeches at Brigham Young University and other dialogues with leaders of the church. So he's sitting in the seat of Rabbi Gershom Sages, the father of the tutor to the prophet Joseph Smith. So the connections are so deep. Joseph Smith was extremely hungry to learn the things of the Jewish people, not just Hebrew, but the traditions As I mentioned, he saw Judaism as retaining the covenant of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And there's a lot of talk in the times and seasons, both from the prophet Joseph Smith and other church leaders, about how grateful they were that the Jewish people had never embraced Christianity on all these centuries, because they would have lost the covenant of Abraham. That's we have some from the Pratt brothers, Orson Pratt in particular, writing about that. And then I think all that whole milieu of this appreciation for the Jewish people for keeping the covenant of Abraham, for the integrity of Judaism, for refusing to be assimilated, and for their attachment to the land of Israel and Jerusalem, and their desire and prayers to return.
Yeah,
This all is working in the prophet Joseph Smith's heart when he's trying to figure out what does the Lord want him to do with the keys that he received from Moses in April 1836.
right. In fact, I just think it's so interesting that really right from the very beginning, including in the times and seasons, Joseph Smith tells the members of the church not to seek to evangelize the Jewish people, but instead his focus is on dedicating a homeland for the Jews for their return. In fact, as early as 1833, think about that, 1833, Joseph said, Judah shall obtain deliverance at Jerusalem. There are testimonies that the Good Shepherd will put forth his own sheep and lead them out from all nations where they have been scattered in a cloudy and dark day to Zion and to Jerusalem. He used that same language about being scattered on a cloudy and dark day in his dedication prayer on the first temple in this dispensation, that temple being the Kirtland Temple in 1836. It's really interesting that really from the very beginning, his first words of that dedicatory prayer harken back to the covenant of Israel. Joseph really tried to teach the people from the very beginning the importance of the ancient covenant being the same new and everlasting covenant that we make today in the terminology that we use. And in that prayer, he specifically prayed, very first words, thanks be to thy name, O Lord God of Israel, who keepest covenant and showest mercy unto thy servants who walk uprightly before thee with all their hearts. In other words, Joseph knew and taught that part of that ancient covenant was the remembrance and the restoration, the redemption and bringing back of the Jewish people. All of Israel, yes, he prays for the gathering of all of Israel, but in that prayer, he specifically prays that Judah, this is in Doctrine and Covenants 109, verses 60 to 64, the children of Judah may begin to return to the lands which thou didst give Abraham, their father.
Mm-hmm.
And then, as you say, Elijah and Moses did both appear with important keys. Elijah with the sealing keys, remember that Elijah's promise, as recorded by Malachi, but clarified for us in Doctrine and Covenants chapter 2, is that the hearts of the children would turn to their fathers. But specifically, the clarification in Doctrine and Covenants chapter 2 is return to the promises made to the fathers. Now, those promises begin with Adam and Eve specifically, but also encapsulate the Abrahamic promise. And as the Lord told Nephi in 2 Nephi chapter 29, I am God, and I covenanted with Abraham that I would remember his seed or his children forever. So in order to fulfill that promise, Elijah comes with the sealing keys and Moses comes with the keys of gathering. And who is Joseph Smith thinking about? Who's he naming specifically of all the tribes? Judah.
Yes, yes. One thing that I think is helpful to think about if you're trying to, what's Elijah's mission, what's Moses's mission? This is a very simple way to think about it, but Elijah, I would argue that Elijah is restoring keys for the vertical gathering, right? That the gathering of the house of Israel vertically, both vertically upwards to one's ancestors. And I love the word that you use, binding. You know, it's sealing, but it's also binding ourselves to the house of Israel. And so Elijah's job is to help us to bind ourselves to our ancestors and to our posterity in the house of Israel. It's up and down. And ultimately, right, when you're going up, it's to bind you all the way back to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, because the family of Israel needs to be restored, right? That is part of the restoration, so that Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob can be bound and sealed to their descendants and their posterity. And then also, you know, the sealing power going forward to our future posterity and our children, that all the house of Israel as a family can be united in one and bound up in those chains. But Moses's keys are horizontal. They're not vertical. They're horizontal in the sense of geography.
Right.
And the gathering of Israel to its lands of promise. In you know, and for the Jewish people, that's very clear, right? It's the land of Israel and the land of Jerusalem, as Nephi uniquely calls, and all the prophets of the Book of Mormon call it the land of Jerusalem. I think that that's because the northern kingdom of Israel had been destroyed, and so all that's remaining is this southern kingdom of Judah that's really centered around the holy city of Jerusalem. So it makes sense to call it the land of Jerusalem instead of the land of Israel, which I think is another proof of the Book of Mormon, of its truth. But in any case, this gathering, once those keys are given to Joseph Smith, you don't waste your keys,
Right.
and you don't wait for the second coming, right? Temple work is to begin immediately, and the gathering of Israel is to begin immediately. And yes, missionary work is a part of that, and gathering the house of Israel, the lost tribes in every nation. But as you said, and as you hinted, the Jewish people are not a lost tribe. They're the only. Judah was the only of the house of only portion of the house of Israel to retain its identity and its covenant.
Right.
And it has a designated land. And that's kind of what we're focused on, but we're you know, both gatherings are occurring at the same time. It's, as a Latter-day Saint, you can embrace both a physical gathering and a spiritual gathering. It's not either or.
And I want to emphasize to your point that there's no such thing as a throwaway tribe. Every single tribe is essential.
Yes.
Plus, a child of Abraham or not, DNA descendant or not, all are invited to come into the covenant family of Israel. Israel is the name of God's covenant family. But within that family, we know again from Genesis 49 and 50, two of the tribes are given leadership responsibilities for all of the house of Israel, specifically Judah and Joseph. Now, Joseph of Egypt foreshadowed what that was going to look like, as well as did his brother Judah. You might recall that Joseph's brothers threw him in a pit and decided that they were going to kill him. Of those brothers, the one who sold him is Judah. So we always think of that as a terrible thing, except for that if we read between the lines and we go back to the scriptures, it tells us that Judah was actually trying to save Joseph's life. Some of the other brothers had decided they were going to kill him. And then Joseph goes to Egypt. He's put in prison. It's a terrible ordeal. He does not deny his covenant or his faith. And then when his brothers show up because they're starving with a famine in the land of Canaan, Joseph eventually reveals himself to them, and he tells them, don't count it against yourselves. They were filled with guilt and horror for many years over what they had done. And he said, God sent me ahead of you to save Israel alive. And that's the terminology used. God sent me ahead of you to save Israel alive. In other words, he was going to provide this food for them and their sustenance. And then, as we know, the entire family goes back to the promised land. But during that scene where Joseph and his brothers are reunited, Joseph tested his brothers to see if they had really changed their hearts. And he had kind of set up a test for them where he planted his cup in Benjamin's saddlebag. And he said, whoever has stolen my cup, that person's going to have to be my slave and live with me forever. This is before he had revealed himself as to his true identity. And do you know who it was who offered himself as a ransom instead of Benjamin to Joseph?
It was Judah.
It was Judah. It was Judah. He said, take me instead. Judah felt very strongly in his heart. And so we see the first example of the role that the Messiah, Jesus Christ of Judah, would play in terms of take me, I'll pay the price for
The
what
ransom.
exactly.
Yeah.
And so then what I really love and was so excited as a member of the church to discover is that Joseph of Egypt prophesied that in the latter days there would be a prophet raised up, a man named Joseph, and whose father's name would be Joseph, who would do this great work in helping to gather and restore all the tribes of Israel. And so that's where we believe this sense of Joseph and Judah, these roles coming together. Again, Judah retained the covenant identity. They kept the covenant record for us in the Bible. Jesus Christ is a Jew. And now Joseph Smith, has the role to do again what Joseph of Egypt did, of saving Israel alive, of gathering them, of bringing them to salvation, as you said, as we come to the temple, and those saving ordinances are performed. Now, it's interesting when we talk about the temple, because again, that prayer for the return of the Jews, return of all Israel, but Judah named specifically, was in 1836. And even prior to the dedication of that temple, Joseph Smith chose a man and prophesied that that man named Orson Hyde would go to the Holy Land, would go to the land of Israel, what we call Israel now, Palestine, Canaan. He would go to that land and dedicate it for the return of the Jews. Tell us about that.
Yeah. So Elder Orson Hyde, right? He even before he sets out to Israel, he has a dream, and the Lord opens his mind that he is to go to London, Amsterdam, Constantinople, and Jerusalem to exercise the keys of the gathering of Israel, which had just been received 5 years before, right? So Moses delivers the keys in 1836. And, of course, revelation upon revelation is occurring, but by 1841, it's time to exercise those keys. And we believe.
Let me just interrupt.
Yeah,
I'm sorry.
yeah.
It was actually during the General Conference, April 1840, that Orson Hyde receives that official call to go. So
Official call.
4 years to the day, basically, later.
Okay.
He's called during General Conference.
He's called during General Conference.
Yes, to go and dedicate the land for the return of the Jewish people, specifically that wording.
Yeah. And Lynda, I just want to say, like, I'm excited to explore more, right, of the reunification of Joseph and Judah. We felt so keen to do this now because Israel and the Jewish people are fighting for their life, and we do want to call upon Joseph and those who embrace their identities as Joseph's responsibility to keep Israel alive, to keep, and in this case, to keep Judah alive, right? The tables have turned in a way, right? But even then, right, there's a famine in the land of Israel, and Joseph is able to protect Judah. And so I want to say, on my own, and not speaking for the United States, but how grateful I am that the United States collectively has taken responsibility to keep brother Judah alive. And members of the church must play a role in that. They can sit on the sidelines if they want. That's fine. The Lord is still going to do his work. But if you want to embrace your role as Joseph, help keep your brother Judah alive. And this is how we're going to frame this clearly so you can see what the role is. Because here's Elder Orson Hyde representing modern day Joseph with the keys that have been delegated to him by the prophet Joseph Smith. And so he goes to London first. He goes in order of the dream, right? And he first goes to London. I won't get into all of this with you, but he tries to get a meeting with the chief rabbi of the Great Britain, Rabbi Solomon Herschel, an Orthodox Ashkenazi rabbi. Orthodox Judaism, Ashkenazi by tradition, leading, and we have all the evidence that his synagogue is praying in the Ashkenazi rites. We have to push back against the false doctrines and false teachings of the Khazar theory and this idea that, the prophet Joseph Smith and Orson Hyde were just dedicating the land for the people that were already there. That's ridiculous. He went to London and to Amsterdam to meet with the Ashkenazi rabbis there in Europe to invite them to return to the land of Israel, and then to dedicate it. Invitation and dedication, right? That is the prophetic pattern. So, in the dream, of London, Amsterdam, Constantinople, and Jerusalem, it's worth here to quote. The Lord says to him, "Here are many of the children of Abraham, whom I will gather to the land that I gave to their fathers, and here also is the field of your labors. Take therefore proper credentials from my people, your brethren, and also from the governor of your state." They're in Illinois by this time, "with the seal of authority thereon, and go ye forth to the cities which have been shown you, and declare these words unto Judah, and say, Blow ye the trumpet in the land, cry, gather together, and say, Assemble yourselves, and let us go into the defense cities, set up the standard towards Zion, retire not, for I will bring evil from the north, and a great destruction. The lion is come up from his thicket, and the destroyer of the Gentiles is on his way. He is gone forth from his place to make thy land desolate, and thy city shall be laid waste without inhabitant." Okay, I have to speak very personally here. I believe that this is a prophecy of the Holocaust. The Lord is always going to warn his people before a calamity. My ancestors, as a Jewish person, were from a shtetl, or a Jewish village, called Bogopol, which is now in modern Ukraine, which is also under attack by a tyrant again. But I look through the records of the shtetl of Bogopol, historical records, and that entire village that my ancestors came from was completely annihilated by the Nazis. So when Orson Hyde has this vision from the Lord that the destroyer of the Gentiles is on his way in 1841, right? It's giving the Jewish people almost a century to leave. "He has gone forth from his place to make thy land desolate, and thy city shall be laid waste." My town, Bogopol, my shtetl, was laid waste by the Nazis, and you can look it up if you don't believe me. Luckily, we went to the New Zion, or to America, which was also dedicated and consecrated for the gathering of the house of Israel, all the tribes. So I want to say this, there are two homelands for the Jewish people. There are also two homelands for all the house of Israel. And Lehi and Nephi and even the prophet Joseph Smith were able to consecrate. I don't know if we have any records. It would be interesting to see if the prophet Joseph Smith ever just dedicated the land of America for the gathering. There may be something there that would require research, but I'm grateful that my ancestors were able to come to America and we were able to avoid the destroyer of the Gentiles. But for the other Jewish people, right? Um, Orson Hyde goes to Jerusalem, to the old Jerusalem. Um, and he's convinced, it appears from the prophets, that Jerusalem has none to guide, none to take her by the hand among all the sons, whom she hath brought forth and reared. But these two sons are come unto thee. The sons of strangers shall build up thy walls. So Orson Hyde, he believes that he and Elder John Page are the ones that originally commissioned. Only Orson Hyde makes it. But he says that we feel that we ought to hurry along and take her by the hand, for we are her sons, but the Gentiles has brought us up. So he's believing that these are the two that are to go to Jerusalem to dedicate the land. Anything that you want to say so far, Lynda, about?
Well, I'm always so grateful thinking about, think about conditions of making that journey. It took Orson Hyde a year. As you've already mentioned, John Page ended up not making the journey. Orson Hyde writes about being shipwrecked, about surviving on snails.
Yeah,
But the fact is that this prophecy originating from Joseph Smith, and the call from Joseph Smith to Orson Hyde, then his own personal dream and instruction from God, burned in his heart so deeply that he overcame all of these obstacles to go and perform this role that the Lord had called him to do. In fact, he talks about that when he went through the city of Beirut. There was so much war going on. Nothing changes, I guess. There was so much war going on there that he saw decapitated bodies in the street.
yeah,
Kind of eerie when we think about what's happening now today. But he was determined in his purpose, and the Lord opened the way for him to fulfill that purpose. I think that's really important too, as we, speaking for Joseph, if we are feeling that called that we are to do something to stand for our brothers Judah and to help to protect Israel, I want us to think about Orson Hyde's experience. It wasn't easy. He
yeah,
went through an incredible, difficult journey to go and perform that work the Lord had called him to do. But the Lord did open the way. And what he did do was so instrumental and so vital in that, what's going to eventually lead to the establishment of Israel. So do you want to talk about a specific prayer?
yes. So he arrives finally in Jerusalem, in the Mount of Olives, and he's overwhelmed with the holiness of the place. And he says very clearly, in Jerusalem there are 7,000 Jews, and then there are 13,000 others, Arabs, Turks, Armenians. So there is a Jewish minority there, but there are Jews already there. Okay, so we have to push back against the anti-Semitic Christian myth that the Jews, as a people, crucified Jesus Christ, which is not true. It was the Romans who actually crucified him, number one, and number two, it was a very small portion of the Sadducees who supported the crucifixion, but the Sadducees were not even full believers in Judaism. They only believed in the five books of Moses. They denied the oral law, and they denied the resurrection. And they used their position to try to usurp the authority of Israel from the house of David, because the Sadducees actually did not want the Messiah at all. They wanted their priestly clan to rule Israel. And so with Jesus, who was a son of David, claiming to be the Messiah, that's why they wanted him dead. But the rest of the Jewish people saying David Melech Yisrael Chai Chai Vikayam, David, David, King of Israel, lives and lives, eternal and unchanging, and existent. So the rest of the Jewish people were so desperate for the king of and the Messiah of the house of David. So don't judge the entire Jewish people over the Sadducees.
In fact, I've written about that quite a bit, Jason. A couple of things to keep in mind there is that we know that it's the priests who went to Pilate and said, "We want you to put him to death."
Yeah,
And specifically, the priests at that time were appointed by the king. In fact, the king kept their robes to officiate in. So the high priest couldn't even go perform his duties without going to the king, who in Jesus's birth time was Herod, and then his sons who followed after him. They'd have to go get the clothing from Herod. So they're very much political animals. In addition, we know that Jesus died at Passover, and that first night that he kept the Passover supper with his apostles, the night that he instituted the sacrament, that night is also referred to as the night of watchings. And so at that time, all of the Israelite men, and this would be Israelite men, anyone from any of the tribes, in keeping the covenant at Sinai, were to present themselves at the temple every year for Passover and the other holy days. But on that night specifically, they were supposed to stay awake all night. What were they to stay awake watching for? It's called the night of watchings. They were to watch for the Messiah. They were to watch how death had passed over the Israelites. So that's the very night he's in Gethsemane. So I always make the point that what would those guys be doing at basically 6 a.m. in the morning, just before dawn? What would they be doing while Jesus is at Pilate's palace? They'd be sleeping, because
Yeah.
they'd had to stay awake all night. It was so serious about staying awake all night that if a priest fell asleep, they lit his clothes on fire, because this was an important part of the responsibility of how they celebrated Passover. So no, that the Pilate's courtyard was not thronged with people demanding that Jesus died. And I think it's so important for us as Christians to understand the reality of what happened there, because unfortunately, the Jews have carried that curse for so many years, that curse of misunderstood as to how the scriptures are recorded and not
Well,
know
right.
none.
And I'm saying it's a curse that they never deserved,
That's right.
because actually we forget Palm Sunday.
Exactly.
Palm Sunday, when we're talking about where were the streets filled to capacity? Well, that was Palm Sunday,
Yeah.
when the Jewish when thousands of Jewish people were lining the streets with palm fronds and palm branches, saying Hosanna, Hosanna to God and the Lamb, right?
Yes.
And so so that not only are the Jewish people not guilty of the crucifixion, the Jewish people were welcome. In the majority of them were welcoming Jesus as he went on the saddle of a donkey into Jerusalem. They were disappointed that he was crucified, and many Jewish people lost faith. But losing faith or doubting is not the same as,
Right.
as being guilty of crucifixion.
His apostles were Jewish. The day of Pentecost, when there were 3,000 people baptized, those were Jews.
Yeah.
And it's
So yep.
important for us to remember that. Yeah.
So I just want to say that there was no entire exile. It's a Christian anti-Semitic myth that there was a full exile of the Jewish people, because Orson Hyde found 7,000 in Jerusalem
Well,
out of only 20,000.
and let me add to that, is in 1830, and you and I've discussed this in depth, Jason, and it's in my book. In 1830, there was a group of rabbis who had moved to Jerusalem,
Yeah.
who through their reading of the ancient teachings and scriptures, particularly from Maimonides, and help me say that correctly, but they believed that there was someone amongst the lost tribes, amongst the lost 10 tribes, and they specifically thought it might be someone from Joseph or Ephraim who had keys to help them to begin, and they literally call it the ingathering of the exiles. In other words, they were looking for someone from within the 10 tribes in 1830. Now, is this a coincidence that the church is formed in 1830? But they were looking for someone to help them to restore Israel and to bring back the priesthood ordinance, the Sanhedrin, and so forth, to bring that back into what was left of then the leaders of Judah. And they sent a letter that went around to all of the courts in Europe looking for this person in 1830, until finally the messenger who was taking that letter was murdered. And so,
Thank you.
yeah, I just
Thank you.
think so.
Yeah.
In terms of were there Jews there, there were Jews there in 1830 looking for help from someone from the 10 tribes. And then there were
Yeah.
7,000 Jews there, as you say, out of 20,000 in 1841 when Orson goes.
And this is what they were looking for the turning of the keys. And now we're going to show you the turning of the keys.
Right.
Orson Hyde starts. Um, he reiterates, thy servant has been obedient to the heavenly vision which thou gavest him in his native land, visiting London, Amsterdam, Constantinople, and now he is in Jerusalem on the Mount of Olives, and he set up an altar of stones in the ancient fashion to dedicate the land, just like an apostle would dedicate a temple. And he dedicates and consecrates this land unto thee for the gathering together of Judah's scattered remnants, according to the predictions of the holy prophets, for the building up of Jerusalem again after it has been trodden down by the Gentiles so long, and for rearing a temple in honor of thy name. So he gives the clear mission, the gathering of Judah's scattered remnants. We already know where he wants them to come from. He was meeting with Ashkenazi Jews in London and Amsterdam. And of course, this applies to all the Jews in the Middle East, the Mizrahim, from Yemen and from Iraq and from Morocco and Persia. He's dedicating the land for all of them, but we know what kind of Jews he's talking about. He's just met with them in Europe. And what else? Jerusalem is the capital of Israel. And then thirdly, eventually a temple in honor of thy name. And we don't know how that's going to come about, but we trust in Heavenly Father that the Jewish people will have a temple again, and they don't yet. So that prophecy hasn't been fulfilled, but there's more. We're gonna set this up for you so you can see in history which of these prophets were fulfilled and which we're still waiting for. So he talks about how in 1841 the land is barrenness and sterility. And he dedicates it, right? Let the land become abundantly fruitful when possessed by its rightful heirs. Let it again flow with plenty to feed the returning prodigals who come home with a spirit of grace and supplication. There was only 20,000 people in Jerusalem, Lynda, in 1841. Now there's a million there, and there's 9 million throughout the entire land within the state of Israel. How do you feed? It's the return of the Jewish people that has allowed them to literally feed Jews and Arabs alike.
That barren land is now flourishing just beyond description. I've been so fortunate to be able to go to Israel a number of times. And it's just remarkable to see not only their agriculture, but things like, I think they're one of the largest milk producers in the world. And the land is just exquisite under the hard work, the labor. And again, that's part of the covenant. That's part of a covenant teaching. When you think back to Jacob with the sheep and Joseph in Egypt and so forth, is that those who keep covenant are hard workers. I think President Nelson has referred to that as well. But it's blooming.
Industrious, as Nephi would say.
Yes.
A couple years ago, I was giving a talk in Israel, and I finally had enough money that I could decide to rent a car. So I rented a car, and I drove all over the country. I drove from Jerusalem to the Tel Aviv area, to the Sea of Galilee area, all over the country, to the north, to the northwest near Haifa, one of the suburbs of Haifa, Zichron Yaakov. I drove all over the country, Lynda, and I was just shocked because I knew, the history, but there was not a single empty space along all the highways and freeways of agriculture and production. I'm from Arizona, right? And we could talk about indigeneity You know, I'm not indigenous to Arizona, right? That's the Native Americans, the Apaches and Navajos. But Arizona, driving on the freeways there is you just hundreds of miles of empty desert. But to see with my own eyes the desert blossom as a rose and no piece left unblossomed
Yeah.
was just overwhelming to me. And but it's a blessing to the Jews and the Arabs, Lynda,
Oh, yeah.
because a lot of Arabs immigrated too
That's right.
to Israel because they were making food, just like Joseph in Egypt. People want to run from the famine of the deserts. So many Arabs came too, and that's a blessing as long as they're peaceful, Lynda, which is what we're dealing with right now.
Right. And we're going to talk about how actually the Jews have had an open hand of invitation to the Arabs to join them in that land and to work beside them and so forth. We'll talk about that in just a few minutes, but it's important for us to recognize that.
And so here I want to share with you this piece of the prayer that is going to lead us to Israel's Declaration of Independence. So, and we're gonna go soon from 1841 to 1948. Orson Hyde prays, right? He's praying to inspire the hearts of kings and the powers of the earth to look with a friendly eye towards this place, and with a desire to see thy righteous purposes executed in relation thereto. Let them know, the kings and presidents of the earth, that it is thy good pleasure to restore the kingdom unto Israel, raise up Jerusalem as its capital, and constitute her people a distinct nation and government. Unmistakable language. We know he's meeting with Ashkenazi Jews. He's meeting some, Sephardic and Mizrahi Jews who are already there, in Jerusalem already. And he knows that this is to be a distinct nation and government. He calls it the kingdom of Israel. He doesn't he doesn't know it's going to be called the state of Israel, but I mean, this is the best he can do in 1841. And this is so interesting. He pronounces a blessing and a curse, which is what all prophets of Israel do. And he says, this is the blessing. Let that nation or that people who shall take an active part. We are encouraging and calling upon Joseph to take an active part right now, Lynda, in behalf of Abraham's children and in the raising up of Jerusalem, find favor in thy sight. Let not their enemies prevail against them. We're talking about, these are blessings for Joseph, Lynda.
Right.
Let not Joseph's enemies prevail against them, neither let pestilence or famine overcome them, but let the glory of Israel overshadow them and the power of the highest protect them. If you want these blessings as members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, as gathered Joseph is being gathered too. You have to stand with the Jewish people. While that nation or kingdom that will not serve thee in this glorious work of Zionism must perish according to thy word. Yea, those nations shall be utterly wasted. This is the curse. We have a choice as members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, as citizens of the United States or whatever nation. If we want our nations to receive those blessings, we have to stand with the Jewish people right now. I don't know how much clearer we can make it. If you don't think Orson Hyde was talking about the Jews, go back in the Joseph Smith papers and see Rabbi Solomon Herschel in London and Rabbi E.J. Lowenstein in the Netherlands. He's meeting with Ashkenazi Jewish rabbis. There's no doubt what this prayer is for. And there's other places where, he knows who I mean, we're just trying to define who is a Jew. So let the prophet Joseph Smith, who met with Joshua Sages, and Orson Hyde meeting with these Ashkenazi Orthodox rabbis, those are who the Jews are. But that doesn't mean that we love the Arab people as well.
We don't love them. Doesn't mean
what's that?
You said it doesn't mean we love them, but you meant it doesn't mean we don't love them.
Well, I'm saying we do love them. We love the
Right.
Arab people as well.
Right.
And they are children of Abraham. And I love how you always go back to the Torah. And I said this in a conversation with somebody the other day, on Mormon book reviews with Steve Pinecker. When Abraham died, Lynda, Ishmael came home,
That's right.
and he came to Beersheba, and they buried their father in the cave of Machpelah in Hebron,
Mhm.
and Ishmael and Isaac embraced, and they buried their father Abraham. And so I acknowledge Hebron is sacred for Jews and Arabs, for the children of Isaac and the children of Ishmael. But what we're calling on is that the Jewish people and the Arab people, we want them to live in peace. That is what
Right.
Father Abraham prayed for, that his children would live in peace. But there has to be a recognition. Ishmael has got to stop killing Isaac and Jacob,
Right.
right? And just let them live in peace. Because the Jewish people don't want war. I know so many. I have a cousin in the IDF right now. Nobody wants to fight this war. We already know from the Torah the children Jacob was the peaceful one compared to Esau.
Right.
And
Right.
that has always been the nature of the Jewish people, but they have had to defend themselves because the destroyer of the Gentiles is unrelenting.
Right. Right. So I just want to say, when we talk about this connection between members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, specifically towards Judah, Orson Hyde recorded that he made two different memorials of stone, one on the Mount of Olives and one on Mount Moriah, where the temple had stood.
Mm,
And I think when I read that, I think about when President Hinckley announced the building of the Nauvoo Temple, and he made the point that it was as if the Salt Lake Temple was looking at the Nauvoo Temple, and
mm,
this sense of bringing those two together. And I have that same feeling in my heart about the eventual temple in Jerusalem, is that Joseph Smith said that the reason that we build temples is literally for the gathering of the Lord's people, the covenant people, the gathering of them to come unto God into that covenant relationship of the family of Israel. And
yeah.
the sense that that is still a prophecy yet to be fulfilled, that Orson did build that memorial there on the site where the temple had stood. To me, that is also this call to Joseph, is that we are brothers. I do want to also to affirm.
Lynda, this is so interesting. You just pointed out, this is so interesting. He did a dedication on the Mount of Olives for the gathering of the Jewish people, but you're right, he went on Mount Moriah, and
Mhm.
you're right, and it says that he erected another
Mhm.
pile of stones,
Yeah,
and he was dedicating the land upon which the future temple would be constructed.
right.
So he did two dedications.
Mhm.
That's incredible.
Mhm.
Wow.
And
Thank you.
so, but again, those temples and the unification would apply for all, all peoples, the Arab people living there as well. That will be a gift and a blessing to them as well when that finally arrives there. And that what it represents is that healing, the healing of the breach, that we are all children of God. We are all children of God. And we have to put this enmity away. And, to your point earlier, the stated purpose of Hamas is extermination. It's extermination of the Jewish people. It's not to convince the Jewish people that they need to build cities elsewhere or take down walls or so forth. It's the extermination.
Yeah.
And that's where we'll talk about that, I think, next week, but that's where we have to stand and do something. So tell us about what happened then after this dedication. The Jews had been basically exiled and dispersed for 2,000 years. It's called the diaspora. Um,
Yes.
that they had been dispersed from their homeland from the time of the Babylonian conquest in the 6th century. And many had come back under the direction of King Cyrus, who had allowed them to be free, but most did not. And so they had been dispersed without a homeland, yearning for this homeland for 2,000 years. So after Orson Hyde's dedication in 1841, what do we see happen?
Well, the keys have been turned, right? And as you said, there were Jewish groups that wanted to return, and well, it's all in Israel's Declaration of Independence. We want to show you here where some of the prophecies were fulfilled in this declaration, which tells the whole story actually of 1841 to 1948. 107 years passed. And we can talk about Theodore Herzl, which he's really the marker in 1897. So Theodore Herzl, he is the Jewish leader who does the same thing as Orson Hyde. And Theodore Herzl, and he goes and he goes to these same cities. He goes to London, he goes to Amsterdam, and he all throughout Europe. And he meets with Jewish leaders, and he forms the Zionist movement. And he writes, the Jewish version of the Orson Hyde prayer called the Jewish State. And he begins to propose the fulfillment. He's a quite secular Jew. He was a journalist in Austria, a Jewish journalist in Austria. He covers what's called the Dreyfus Affair. Alfred Dreyfus, who was a Jewish officer in the French military. And Dreyfus is completely and without any evidence accused of spying for the Germans. And so he goes on trial, and Dreyfus is imprisoned, exiled to an island. And there's just a total clamor because there's absolutely no evidence that Dreyfus was disloyal to the French state and the French military. And so Theodore Herzl is assigned by his newspaper, the Neue Free Press, to cover this story. And he realizes, well, I'll just say he realizes the destroyer of the Gentiles is coming. He realizes Orson Hyde's, inspired insight, that the Jewish people are not going to have a home in Europe anymore. Because this Dreyfus trial is the lightning rod, because he realized this innocent, faithful, loyal French Jew is unable to get any justice. And he's scapegoated to deflect the blame from the French failures, and he realizes this is going to happen to Jews all over Europe, that Europe is turning anti-Semitic, and so he proposes that a Jewish state. He forms the Zionist Congress, the World Zionist Congress, in 1897, and they have their first meeting in Basel, Switzerland. And the hotel is still there, and there's a whole history there that maybe that's something to do a trip to, because this is the fulfillment. Theodore Herzl answers the call, and I think that's all I can say about that. But that's a turning point when the Jewish people really began to organize themselves to accomplish this gathering. And so, as we just read, Orson Hyde's prayer, that the primary purpose first is the gathering of the Jewish people. And I've had to explain this to so many Latter-day Saints, Lynda. I said, if you're going to have a lot of immigrants come into a new country or a new territory, you've got to protect them. You can't just, let them, here's a bunch of immigrants. We're not going to help. We're not going to protect you. We're not going to feed you. We're not going to help you find jobs. That's ridiculous. You need a state. If you're going to have a gathering of the Jews, then you need a state to protect them and help them have an organized society to stay there. You can't just gather them and then they can't feed themselves and they can't protect themselves, because then they're going to leave.
Mhm.
There's a prophecy in Amos chapter 9 that the Lord would plant the children of Israel in their land. So you have to have a state of Israel. And here it says, the land of Israel was the birthplace of the Jewish people, right? Here they gave the world the eternal book of books. And like you were saying, Lynda, the whole history is right here. After being forcibly exiled from their land, the people kept faith with it throughout their dispersion and never ceased to pray and hope for their return to it and for the restoration in it of their political freedom.
And by the way, you're
Yeah.
reading directly from what document?
The Declaration of the Establishment of the State of Israel.
Yeah.
May 14th, 1948. It's thick with the language of prophecy, Lynda.
Yeah. Keep going.
And like you just mentioned, Jews strove in every successive generation to reestablish themselves in their ancient homeland. They've always tried to come back. Like you've studied that history. The Romans forcibly exiled many of them, but it's not like they just abandoned the land of Israel. It's just they never got the chance to come back until we are making the claim, until the elder Orson Hyde of the Quorum of the 12 Apostles turned the keys for them to come back. And even Orson Hyde says in his journals that in the providence of God, the providence of the divine, that the British would be the nation that would facilitate their return.
Yeah, that was amazing. That was truly amazing.
And
when you look at the numbers and the dates, it's truly awe-inspiring. You can't explain it away in any other context, but as a spiritual context, as a promise covenant that has been kept by God on his people.
Orson Hyde knew exactly how this prophecy would be fulfilled in history. And the British in 1917, they called for the Balfour Declaration. The British military had liberated the land of Israel from the Ottoman Empire in World War I. And the Christian Zionists who were inside the British homeland at the time wanted to facilitate the return of the Jewish people. So between 1917 and 1947, the British were the sponsors. They had ups and downs, and that's a whole separate history that we could get into. But Orson Hyde, in this, A Voice from Jerusalem, right? This entire document, written by Orson Hyde, A Voice from Jerusalem, he says that it's going to be the British, and it was. The pioneers, the Ma'apilim, immigrants coming to Eretz Israel, the land of Israel, in defiance of restrictive legislation, and defenders, they made deserts bloom, revived the Hebrew language, built villages and towns, and created a thriving community, controlling its own economy and culture. And here's the most important thing that we really want Latter-day Saints to take out of this: loving peace, but knowing how to defend itself, bringing the blessings of progress to all the country's inhabitants, and inspiring towards independent nationhood. And that's what we're saying. The Jewish people in their gathered homeland have been a blessing to all the inhabitants. And I already mentioned Theodore Herzl. He's the spiritual father of the Jewish state.
In 1897, by the way, just to kind of keep our dates lined up, because
1897, yeah.
Again, 1841, dedication by Orson Hyde, 1897, basically 50 years. I mean, when we're talking about 2,000 years of not being in their homeland and not being a free people, let's clarify, because they, as you mentioned, many Jews were, Jesus is born in Israel, but under Roman occupation. So they have not been a free people for thousands of years. And then, so 50 years after the dedication, we have Theodore Herzl, who is who is saying, yes, let's start this Zionist cause.
Yes. And then the Holocaust, Lynda. The Holocaust, the massacre of 6 million Jews in Europe, was another clear demonstration of the urgency of solving the problem of its homelessness by reestablishing in the land of Israel the Jewish state. And what's the purpose? Orson Hyde, the gathering together of Judah's scattered remnants. That's Orson Hyde language, prophetic language, which would open the gates of the homeland wide to every Jew and confer upon the Jewish people the status of a fully privileged member of the comity of nations. Right? The Jewish people returned with now that the keys are turned, undaunted by difficulties, restrictions, and dangers. They never ceased to assert their right to a life of dignity, freedom, and honest toil in their national homeland. And then he makes a claim. The Jewish people stood with the Allies in World War II, Lynda. They contributed their full share of struggle of the freedom and peace-loving nations against the forces of Nazi wickedness. This is where we need to make a connection to today, to 2023. What Hamas is doing is wicked. It's evil. It's trying to exterminate the Jewish people. Okay, and then in 1947, we have the whole history here, Lynda. And we could, if you want me to, the Declaration tells us the whole history, right? And I could go off on any of these events. 1947. Oh, go ahead.
No, I would love you to share the history, and maybe we're going to be doing some future podcasts.
Yeah.
Maybe we can dive in a little bit deeply on each of those portions.
We can, yeah. We just want to introduce, right, that this inspired document, which I would argue is just as inspired as America's Declaration of Independence. Know ye not that there are more nations than one, as Nephi says in 2 Nephi 29. So on November 29th, 1947, the United Nations General Assembly passed a resolution calling for the establishment of a Jewish state. And this is why what's happening in the United Nations is so troubling. If you look at the news, this recognition by the United Nations of the right of the Jewish people to establish their state is irrevocable. So the international community recognized what was a divine right. So there's all these rights, and this very stark language that I think is so important for Joseph to recognize. This right is the natural right of the Jewish people to be masters of their own fate, like all other nations in their own sovereign state. And so this is why we'll talk about in our next episode about the right of Israel's self-defense that we must support, because what's the option? The alternative is that the Jewish people are driven from their state or exterminated in their state. And that is against the prophets and undermines the prophets. We've already established that. So and here's this, I'll skip ahead. The state of Israel will be open for Jewish immigration and for the ingathering of the exiles. Biblical language that goes precisely along with Joseph Smith and Orson Hyde. It will foster the development of the country for the benefit of all of its inhabitants. It will be based on freedom, justice, and peace as envisaged by the prophets of Israel. And so as members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, our founding prophet, Joseph Smith, is one of those prophets who envisioned this Jewish state built on freedom, justice, and peace. And it will ensure complete equality of social and political rights to all its inhabitants, irrespective of race, religion, or sex. And that's something that Israel makes mistakes in, but there is a freedom of religion. I would argue that we would not have a Brigham Young University Jerusalem Center were it not for the state of Israel's laws and policies on freedom of religion. Can you imagine Hamas allowing Latter-day Saints to worship on the Mount of Olives? I mean, let's just be clear here. The state of Israel will guarantee freedom of religion, conscience, language, education, and culture. It will safeguard the holy places of all religions. And as we just said, I didn't even realize this, 2 separate dedications that Orson Hyde also went on Mount Zion, Mount Moriah, to dedicate for a future temple. And I had a fascinating conversation that Hamas is so angry, Lynda, that Jews are praying on Mount Moriah.
And it's not just Jews, Jason. I have been on Mount Moriah. I've been by the Alaska Mosque, sitting and reading my scriptures, having been given the instruction that no one is allowed to pray on that mountain except a Muslim. And just, simply reading my scriptures, and a guard with a machine gun came and tapped my shoulder with a machine gun to warn me not to pray.
It's tragic. I mean, Hamas is saying, Lynda, right now, they're saying that they started this terrorist attack and murder of babies, beheading babies, violating and raping innocent women, murdering elderly people, Holocaust survivors, kidnapping children and holding them in cages. They're saying that their justification is because they're so angry that Jewish people are praying on a sacred holy site that one of our prophets, Orson Hyde, dedicated the Temple Mount for Jewish prayer, for Christian prayer, for Latter-day Saint prayer. Hamas's war is not, it's not this to Jews. If you think it's only the Jews and that you're safe as a Latter-day Saint.
No. And I do want to talk about that in depth next time. And specifically, we'll also address the fact that Hebron, Jericho, and Bethlehem were given by the state of Israel, or the Jews were given, those 3 holy states, to our holy places, were given to the Palestinians. And also we'll talk about the Temple Mount. But for now, let's just focus on this declaration of the state of Israel and how much it does coincide with Orson Hyde's language of prayer. In regard to the Palestinians specifically, because I do want to address that, as part of that declaration, it says, "We appeal in the very midst of the onslaught launched against us now for months to the Arab inhabitants of the state of Israel to preserve peace and participate in the upbuilding of the state on the basis of full and equal citizenship and due representation in all its provisional and permanent institutions."
Yes.
We extend our...
I mean, it's almost inspired language for what we're dealing with right now.
Right. I mean, it's in the Constitution.
In the Declaration of Independence. Yeah. And people say that Israel is an apartheid state. Well, it has Arab members of the Knesset, of the Congress, of the legislative branch. In the previous government, there were Arab members of the executive branch, Palestinian members of the executive branch. There are Palestinian members of Israel's Supreme Court. So in the executive, legislative, and judicial branches of Israel's government, there have been and there are Palestinian Arab members.
That's right.
So that because this is what the foundation of the state. They are inviting the Arabs to participate, to preserve peace and participate in the upbuilding of the state. The problem is not with the peaceful Arabs and Palestinians. The problem is with the terrorists. And that's what this war is all about right now.
Right. Well, with that in mind, let's go ahead and address the controversy that I'm hearing a lot on the news today about the land of Palestine, and are the Palestinians named after that land, and how dare they take the name of Israel and so forth. You want to address that question?
Well, the name Palestine was kind of imposed upon the land by the Romans after the Roman siege of in the first century in 70 AD CE, and then 135 after the Bar Kokhba revolt. They wanted to de-Judaize the land. It was actually calling the land Palestine was really had anti-Semitic motivations, because they wanted to humiliate the Jewish people. And we defeated you. Now, well, just even to push back, right? Folks want to use this Christian anti-Semitic myth that there was a total and absolute Jewish exile from the land of Israel after the death of Christ. But there was actually a Jewish state from 132 to 135 CE, led by Bar Kokhba. Now, Bar Kokhba is not the greatest figure in Jewish history, but the idea that there could never be a Jewish state until all the Jewish people become Christian or something is not even true historically. So Bar Kokhba was able to have a sovereign Jewish state for about 3 years, and then the Romans destroyed that state, and they began to call the land Palestine, and that's really, and it comes from the Philistines, Goliath, right? So I mean, if people want to call the land Palestine, they can do whatever they want, but they're calling for members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints who believe in the Bible and in the Book of Mormon. I mean, why would you call the land something after Goliath?
Well, the main enemies of the Israelite people as they were going into the land of Canaan were the Philistines, and so
Yeah.
it is sort of that sense. I'm gonna build my church on top of your old temple kind of deal. When the 10 tribes were carried away captive, they were the first of the Israelites to have become apostate. And something that is part of the reason they're called the lost tribes, and we're gathering them even now, and they're discovering their identity through their patriarchal blessings, is because they became Assyrianized. They were captured by Assyria. They completely assimilated the Assyrian culture and worship and so forth. And we see that in the way that most of those nations or empires would conquer another people. They would carry them away out of their land, and they would assimilate them into their culture. And it has been something sort of a thorn in the side of all of those different nations that the Jews would not do that. That the Jews always maintained they were a covenant people. Specifically, importantly, is that with the Babylonian conquest, the Jews essentially said, oh, you know what? Jeremiah and the other prophets were right, and we have sinned against God. And what was the sin that they were accused of having a false form of worship? They brought idols into the temple and so forth. And so they said, we will never do that again. And so they became a very unique people, and they were persecuted for it. That they maintained their one God religion, that they retained the fact that they were a covenant people, that they honored the scriptures. The main accusations Christians have against Jews today is they say, well, they made a hedge against the law, and there's all these rabbinical teachings that they hold to. But the whole purpose for that was the desire to say, hey, look, we fell into sin before the Babylonian conquest. We're never going to do it again. So if we're supposed to keep the Sabbath day holy, here's some ways that we can make some descriptions of, you can do this, but you can't do that. So it was born out of a desire to retain their purity. And so each of these nations that tried to conquer the Jews, I mean, everyone all the way down to Hitler, was this sense, we're going to take away your identity as a people. We're going to separate you. And then in essence, with the Romans here, we're going to call you by the name of your enemies, so that to prove you have no right to this land. But again, if we even go to the book of Abraham chapter 2, is that we understand that part of that Abrahamic covenant was the promise of land that was given to Abraham and his posterity. As you've already pointed out, are the Palestinians, are the Arabs part of Abraham's posterity? Yes. Did Ishmael receive blessings as Abraham's child? Yes. Tremendous blessings that were not far behind those received by Isaac. And so the sense that we're going to call your land by another name It's just part, when we participate in that, we're part of that persecution.
No, thank you, Lynda. And we affirm the rights of Muslim people to pray in the holy places. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
That's why Israel's Declaration of Independence is so important. It will safeguard the holy places of all religions. We believe that Muslims have the right to pray at the Temple Mount or Haram al-Sharif, and we want them to continue to pray, and at the tomb of the patriarchs in Hebron, because both peoples claim Abraham as their father. The problem is not that the Muslims don't have a right to this. Israel has been upholding the rights of Muslims in their holy places all these decades. The issue is that the Jewish people don't have a right, or Christians have a right, because of this terrorist form of religion. And so I did want to share this just to finish off the declaration. The state of Israel is prepared to do its share in a common effort for the advancement of the entire Middle East. I have been doing research. I received a grant to research the Abraham Accords. The trade between the United Arab Emirates and the state of Israel is booming, Lynda. Something like, I think last I was seeing, well, I don't want to misquote, but it's billions of dollars, Lynda, billions of dollars. And these are the children of Abraham. That's why it's called the Abraham Accords.
Right, right.
And Israel is helping to develop any Arabs that will have peace with it. Israel is willing to help them advance and develop, and in return as well. And what is the blessings? Remember what we just saw, the blessings and the curses from Orson Hyde. Let me just revisit that really quickly. Right? The blessings, if you support the Jewish people in this cause of restoration, right? Neither let pestilence or famine overcome them, but let the glory of Israel overshadow them, and the highest power of the highest protect them. I believe those blessings are being poured out on the United Arab Emirates as we speak. And they are the first Arab country that will have a temple of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. So when you bless the Jews, you will be blessed. It doesn't apply to the United States only. The United Arab Emirates is being blessed, both economically and their prosperity and peace. They will receive protection from terrorist enemies, as they stand with the Jewish people.
Something you shared with me the other day on a phone call that I just kind of want to touch a little bit on again is that you said something to the effect that this is a freedom of religion and a spiritual, moral war that's going on, and to kind of back away from the idea of it being a political war. And to kind of underscore your point of something you said a few minutes ago, plus that phone conversation, is that in 1967 and in 1948, when Israelis, by might of military force, had control of the Temple Mount, what did they do? Did they tear down the two Islamic mosques on Temple Mount? What did they do?
Yeah, go ahead. They protected it.
They protected it. And they did not begin building the Jewish temple, which they know that their Arab neighbors do not want them to do. But for the sense that those are two sort of trigger points for the Palestinian people, 1967 and 1948, and those battles that were fought. But I do want to just kind of point out when you said that the Jews, they don't want a war, and they want the right to live in freedom with their neighbors and offer that same freedom to their neighbors. I think is really underscored by their actions then in regard to the Temple Mount and the Jewish desire for another temple. The Jews do have a great desire for that temple. When we see the pictures of the Western Wall, which is the last remaining foundational wall of the ancient temple there, they have a great yearning, but they're not doing it by force. They're not tearing down the mosques up on the Mount. And so I think that says a great deal in terms of what's happening today and where the two people are standing.
Yeah, I mean, it's my personal opinion. I look back to the Book of Kings, right? The books of Kings. I mean, Solomon as the king in the house of David, I think he set the pattern. The Messiah or the king of the house of David, I think from the biblical pattern has to lead the way in building the Temple of Jerusalem. I know that there's a lot of different opinions, but that's the best precedent I have. And King David established the state, right, in ancient times. David Melech Israel, and but of course it took a lot of bloodshed to establish the state of Israel, in King David's time. And then his son Solomon inherited a kingdom of peace, a state of peace, and was able to build the temple. So I do think that that's my personal opinion. I'm not saying it's a doctrine, but it is found in the scriptures that when the Messiah, the inheritor of David and Solomon, can establish peace and have that peace, then I think will be the time that we'll get to see the third temple. But in the meantime, the children of Ishmael have every right to worship at the sacred mount, and Orson Hyde dedicated that space. For all the children of Abraham to worship. And even the prophecies of Zechariah that all nations will come to the temple to celebrate Sukkot. And I'm so grateful for you, Lynda, for how you've tried to inspire and educate Latter-day Saints that these festivals are for us as well. And if we say, I don't want to go to celebrate Sukkot or the Feast of Tabernacles in Jerusalem at that Jewish temple, well, you'll be cursed. So change your attitude.
Those ancient holy days, also called feast days, were given to all the children of Israel at Mount Sinai, all the tribes, all the members, and it says all the strangers who would like to be part of Israel.
Yeah.
They were given those holy feast days, temple holy days, to remember, to look forward and to remember the covenants. I mean, it's the same reason we go to the temple today, really, is to remember to participate and partake of sacred covenants and to extend those covenants to others. So we've made a point, and I'm going to say it again, that we don't represent the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and that we are trying to give a little historical context as we both feel and see it coming from our different and varied backgrounds. Both with a love for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints in the Restoration, and also both with a love for the ancient people called Judah and their struggles today, as well as all the tribes of Israel. I want to end with this quote from President Howard W. Hunter on the subject. He says, "Let me cite as an example of exclusiveness the present problem in the Middle East, the conflict between the Arabs and the Jews. We do not need to apologize nor mitigate any of the prophecies concerning the Holy Land. And we know that the scriptures, both the Book of Mormon and the Bible, are full of prophecies regarding the return of Judah to Israel and Jerusalem. We do not need to apologize. We believe them and declare them to be true. But this does not give us justification to dogmatically pronounce that others of our Father's children are not children of promise. Both the Jews and the Arabs are children of our Father. They are both children of promise, and as a church, we do not take sides. We have love for and an interest in each. The purpose of the gospel of Jesus Christ is to bring about love, unity, and brotherhood of the highest order." Now, we'll talk next week about President Hinckley's talk of following 9/11 and about how do we behave, how do we respond when there's actually terrorism involved. And as we know that officially Hamas is declared a terrorist group, and their stated purposes are terrorism and extermination of the Jewish people. We'll talk about that next week. But also ongoing, we're going to have a discussion not only about political happenings. Jason is also the author of a book called America's Road to Jerusalem, which I found very important and enlightening. And so we will talk about some of the political issues of today, but we're also going to talk about the history of the tribes of Israel, specifically Judah and Joseph, and their role today in in gathering. And so we hope, number one, please leave some questions down below that you might have for us that you'd like us to address. And we hope that you will subscribe and tune in for future podcasts from us. Jason, you want to add anything?
No, thank you so much. We're just grateful for the time you've spent with us, and we just call upon our Joseph, the members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Let me just tweak this final phrase in the Israel's Declaration of Independence. We appeal to the Jewish people throughout the diaspora, and also to Joseph, members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, to rally round the Jews of the land of Israel in the tasks of immigration and upbuilding, and to stand by them in the great struggle for the realization of the age-old dream, the redemption of Israel.
Powerful. Thank you, Jason. Thank you, everyone, for joining with us.
Thank you.